or section 3.2, and this continues this whole agency sort of discussion, is all about disclosures. Now, to be clear, we talked about disclosure earlier today, but we were talking about disclosures that are made to clients. This section is about disclosures that are made to customers. We are really talking about disclosure being made to someone other than our clients. And here's why we have to differentiate them. Remind me, what do we disclose to our clients? What information, if we're aware of it, do we disclose to our clients?
Everything.
Everything. I mean, we just don't put any limitation on it at all. But when it comes to other people in transactions and other situations in transactions, the disclosure rules are going to be very different. One of the first ones that you're going to have to know, and this will definitely show up on the state particular section of the exam, the next couple of slides, the next 4, I think it is, and they all have the North Carolina flag or state outline on them, so they're easy to identify. When you take the test, you will see test questions about the North Carolina Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure law and disclosure statement. So listen, it's got a long name, but I want you to pay attention to something here. It says property owner, right? Disclosure. Who do you think is signing this disclosure form? Who do you think is filling this disclosure form out in the transaction?
The owner.
Buyer.
The owner.
The seller.
In the transaction, is that the buyer or the seller?
The seller.
The seller.
Seller.
The seller.
This is the seller's disclosure form when residential property is being sold in North Carolina. And we know it is residential because it's the Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure statement. So one question you might be asked, does this apply to all transactions? Is this form to be used by sellers in all transactions?
No.
No. It is only used in residential transactions. And yes, Seth is correct. RPODs is what the folks that work over at the Real Estate Commission call that form, the Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement. They just call it RPODs for short. The form is required. Notice what it says there on the note. It says, sellers of most residential property, and we're going to talk about the exceptions, but most residential property are required to provide the form when they're selling their home. However, look at this statement right here, because this is what's going to be tough for you to sort of get kind of assimilated in your brain. The sellers have to fill out the form, but they don't actually have to give any information. What can they choose to answer if they want to that would prevent them from actually disclosing anything about their property?
No representation.
No representation.
They've been represented.
They can check no representation. And no representation does not mean there's a problem. It doesn't mean there's not a problem. It doesn't mean we know there's a problem. It doesn't mean we don't know there's a problem. If a seller checks no representation, it literally means I'm not telling you. I'm refusing to tell you. And folks, as a seller in this state, you have the option of checking no representation on that form. You don't have the option of not filling out the form.
Right.
The form is required.
Gotta fill it out.
You got to fill it out, but you can essentially plead the fifth. How many of you have ever heard that expression? You know, I plead the fifth. I'm not going to testify against myself, right? This is like the selling property version of pleading the fifth. You just don't answer the questions. You're essentially refusing to answer the questions, even though you're filling out the form. There are 3 main categories of property that are exempt from the Residential Property Disclosure Act. And those are foreclosures, new construction, and any property that's being sold by an estate. And if you think about it, why do you think foreclosure sales would be exempt from the seller having to fill out a disclosure form? Why do you think that? So why would you see this exemption? Why do you think foreclosures would be exempt?
Because being
It's
forced to sell.
foreclosed.
Going to foreclose, the seller doesn't have it.
Yeah, I like the force.
Is the seller even participating in this sale, or are they being forced?
They're being forced.
Forced.
So the seller's forced, right? And so because the sale or the seller themselves is being forced, there's no requirement to fill out the form. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
How about new construction? Why would that be exempt from a disclosure form?
Because
There's
there's nothing
nothing to
to disclose.
No
Nothing
issues,
closed, new.
no issues to disclose, right? It's new.
Right.
There shouldn't be any problems with the property. Everybody, does that make sense for everybody?
Yep.
And why do you think properties being sold by an estate would be exempt?
Because the previous owners
they might-
are deceased.
It's hard to fill out a form when you're what?
Dead.
When you dead.
You don't have an owner.
Right, the owner, the only person who could, because here's what the form is designed to be. It's designed to be, here's what I know about the property based on living here. Well, in the case of an estate, the person who lived there is dead. So there's literally nobody to fill the form out. So that's why these three are exempt. Now, how's this going to be tested? Buyers should receive this form from the seller filled out. Look at this. Prior to making what? Prior to not prior to purchasing the property. Prior
Make
to
an
doing
offer.
what?
Make an offer.
Prior to making an offer. Before you even allow the buyer to make an offer, they by law are supposed to be given this disclosure form, which has been filled out by the seller. Is everybody all right with that?
Yes.
Now, our responsibility is simply to tell the seller, you're required to fill out the form. Give the blank form to the seller, tell them they're required to fill it out. We should never provide the answers that go on the form. And here's why. These answers are supposed to be the seller's answers. They're supposed to be answering to the best of their knowledge. We are not held responsible for our sellers giving bad information. But if we give bad information, do you think we're held responsible?
Yeah.
And so if we're filling the form out and we put bad information on the form, do you think we can be held responsible for that bad information being on the form? So don't do it. Do not answer it for them. Don't fill it out. Give them the form to fill it out for themselves. William, you had a question? I think your hand's up. Did you have a question, William? You hear him, Seth?
It's very muted, William.
Yeah, I didn't hear anything.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. I'll type
I
it.
can hear you.
Well, if I'm a buyer's agent, I'm sitting in the office, the buyer comes in, they want to look at the property. Where would I get the seller's disclosure when they look at a property and they like it?
Did you get that, Seth? I couldn't hear it.
If a buyer comes into a property, where would they get the disclosure form? Is that correct? Okay, here you guys.
If a buyer comes into the office, where would they get their disclosure form? Well, that's up to I saw it put in the chat, if a buyer comes into the office, that's up to the individual office, how they want to handle this. Our responsibility is to make sure that the buyer is provided the form. So we could email it, we could have it available in the property. A lot of agents will simply have them available in the property itself. So as buyers go in and take a look at the property, there is the disclosure statement right there available for them to pick up. A lot of agents will upload the disclosure statement to the MLS listing, and so that it's available for buyers. So how we get it to them is pretty much left up to us. It's just that we have to take responsibility for making sure they get it. And so I hope that was the question. If not, you can look. Before an offer. Yes, I did hear that part. Yes, before the buyer makes an offer. That's correct. Now, if the buyer does not receive this, before they make an offer. Because let's be honest, every time we have a rule, people are going to violate the rule. I would say this right here is probably really good target for a test question right there. What happens if the seller violates the rule? And so let's be clear what it means when we say the seller violates the rule. Either the seller never filled the form out at all, that would violate the rule, or the seller did fill it out, but the buyer did not see it before they made their offer. Is everybody with me on what a violation of the rule would be? Everybody good? If this rule is violated and we go under contract, because if you think about an offer gets made, if the offer gets accepted, we're now under contract and everybody's bound to do what they promised to do, right? Here's what we're saying. That contract is no good for the first 3 days. If the buyer does not see this form before they make an offer, it basically gives them 3 days for free to change their mind, back out, terminate the deal at no penalty whatsoever. So if a seller wants to make sure that doesn't happen, wants to make sure that a buyer does not have this ability to just terminate for no reason within that first 3 days, the seller should make sure that the buyer sees this thing when they make an offer. Is everybody good with that?
Yep, test question potential for sure.
And I'll tell you, we because this is so important in North Carolina, we actually, on our most commonly used purchase agreements, if you look at contracts that are used pretty often in North Carolina, they will almost always have a yes or no statement that the buyer has to check off on there. Either, yes, I have seen the residential property disclosure statement before I made my offer, or no, I have not seen the residential property disclosure statement before I made my offer. That way, everybody knows if they've checked the box that says yes, then the contract is immediately going to be binding as soon as the two parties agree. But if they've checked the box that says no, then basically the two parties agree, but the buyer can still get out for how long?
3 days.
For 3 days. 3 days.
So it really depends on if we are representing the seller or the buyer whose best interest it is to get
Well,
that out there.
That's exactly right. I think a lot of people think it's in the best interest of the buyer to see this form. I actually think it's in the best interest of the seller to make sure the buyer sees the form, because as a seller, I don't think you want the buyer to have this 3 days to just sort of waltz in and
Change their
out,
mind.
change their
Yep.
mind.
But if you're working on the buyer side as like a selling agent, it's probably in their best interest to not have them see the form if they can have the 3 days.
Right. Alicia, you got-
Best interest for lack of a better term.
I do. So we have to disclose this information to the buyer before they make an offer. When would we do that? Like when they ask to see the property, would we email it out then?
well, that's where it becomes your choice, because the rule is not going to be specific about that. The rule just says before they make an offer. So, that's why I say some agents, some listing agents will literally put it on the kitchen counter in the property. They put a stack of them over there and they say, here, take one of these with you when you look at the property. That way, every buyer who looks at the property, there's the disclosure statement. Some agents will upload it to the MLS listing. So anybody that looks at it online can see the residential property disclosure statement. Some agents will wait until somebody contacts them and says, well, yeah, we're thinking about making an offer. And they'll say, well, wait a minute, I need to send you an email. That's going to be individual choice as long as it's done before an offer.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is just a glimpse of what the residential property disclosure statement looks like. And it's not the whole thing. It's 4 pages long. But as you can see, it's just a series of questions. But what I wanted you to see about the form, most importantly, is the way the questions can be answered. So like, just look at question number 5 right here. So we're just going to take a look at this line right here. Okay. It says, is there any leakage or other problem with the dwelling's roof? So is there any problem with the dwelling's roof? Now remember, who are we asking? Who's filling this form out?
Seller.
The seller is.
Seller.
So we're asking the seller, is there any leaks or problems with the dwelling's roof? Well, the seller could check the box here that says yes. And if they do, it asks them for an explanation later on down the page. or the seller could check the next box over, which says, no, there's no problem with the roof. There's also that third option that you need to remember is available to them here. If the seller either doesn't know if there are problems with the roof or would rather not say, are they free to check that box right there on the form?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And if they check that box right there, folks, can their answer be held against them in any way? Or is that just basically saying, I don't owe you an answer and I'm not going to answer?
I don't owe you one. I don't
Don't owe
know
you an
one.
answer.
That's it.
I don't know the answer.
That's it. I don't owe you the answer. I'm not going to give you an answer. Figure it out on your own, because that is their legal right. And folks, here's the truth. There are going to be some of these, in fact, quite often, that you get, and you know what they look like? Right there. The sellers take all of 3 seconds to fill them out. They just draw a line through no representation all the way down all 4 pages. And that complies with the rule. That is filling out the form. The rule does not say they have to be forthcoming on the form. So what that really does is puts the ball back into the buyer's court as far as figuring out what's going on with the property.
So what if you purchased a home that, let's say it was, from an estate that the original owner is deceased, and, most of this information or all of it was no representation. If you go to sell the home, say 10 years later, how would you respond to these questions as the seller? Would you, if you don't know, check no representation because it wasn't disclosed to you?
Well, it's not, at that point, it doesn't matter whether it was disclosed to you or not. It's about what you know and what you want to disclose. So don't try to base it on what somebody told you. You're the seller, you're the owner now. What do you know? Or what are you willing to say? And so it's if you notice, it even says, the following questions address the characteristics and condition of the property identified about which the owner has actual knowledge. So if they don't know, they can certainly check no representation, or if they just rather not say. And so that's what I always tell sellers. I say, listen, here are the 3 answers. You can say, yes, there's a problem. You can say, no, there's not a problem. You should only say yes or no if you know those are the truth. Don't lie. If you don't know, or you do know and you'd rather not say, you have the option of checking no representation. And so I just explain to them what the choices are and then let them fill them out. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Yep. Everybody okay with that? That is the Residential Property Disclosure Statement Act in North Carolina. And that's it.
Did you say what RPOADS means? What's that an acronym for?
Residential Property and Owners Association Disclosure Statement.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's Residential Prop Owners Association
Disclosure.
Sorry.
That's where it comes, and statement is the S.
Oh, I
Gotcha.
see now.
RPOs.
You'll definitely see me type it like that from now on.
It's a lot shorter just to say RPOs for sure. Now, just a reminder, we are not talking about disclosure to clients in this section. We are talking about disclosure to who? What's the other C word?
Customers.
Customers. Because clients we've already dealt with. And now we're moving away from what the seller has to disclose, and we're moving into what we have to disclose. There are items in these transactions that we are required as the licensee, no matter whose side we're on, whether we are representing the seller or whether we're representing the buyer, there are items involved in these transactions which we are required to disclose. Those items are called material facts. And these are items that we are required to disclose not only to our clients, because we disclose everything to our clients, but more importantly, pay attention here, Who else do we owe these disclosures to?
Clients and
Customers.
customers.
Customers as well. These are things, and so by the way, isn't that the same thing as saying we owe everybody this information? Because if,
Yes.
if you say we
Yes.
owe it to clients and customers, that's literally every person. Okay, so when we talk about material facts, we owe the disclosure of material facts to everyone involved in the transaction. So what is a material fact? A material fact is a fact about the property which would potentially change the buyer's mind about the purchase of the property. It's not something about the people involved in the transaction. It's about the property. It's specifically about the transaction. Something about the transaction that would change this person's mind. Generally, we think of it as things that are wrong with the property, but it could also be things that are right with the property. But most commonly, we think of material facts as being flaws or being issues with the property. I cannot stress enough how important this slide is just in getting your brain in the right place. We don't have the ability to say no representation as real estate licensees. Can the seller on their disclosure statement check no representation for anything they would like?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Folks, let me be clear. Whatever the seller puts on their statement is whatever the seller puts on their statement.
Right.
That should have no bearing whatsoever on what you as a licensee choose to disclose about that property.
So
In
like
other
in
words-
other words, we basically don't even put any weight on that, on the seller's answers.
Shouldn't put any weight on the seller's answers. Our job is to disclose what we know needs to be disclosed, no matter what the seller chooses to do. So as an example, if there's an obvious leak in the roof, is it possible for the seller to check no representation on that form, even if they know the roof leaks?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes, but is it possible for us to choose not to disclose that the roof leaks?
No, sir.
No.
No. Even if the seller is our client, even if the seller tells us, don't you dare tell anybody that the roof leaks, we don't have a choice because that is defined as a material fact. And material facts are items that we disclose to who in the transactions?
Everybody,
Everybody.
clients and
Everybody.
customers.
Everybody, regardless of our relationship to them or not. So here's the way I like to think about material facts. You're not going to be making your client happy. Your client's not going to like you when it comes to material facts. These are things that your client would rather you not say. These are things that your client would rather you be quiet about if your client is the seller, but you don't have a choice because the law says you have to disclose them. Taj, I saw your hand come up.
Yeah, so for the disclosure to the third party or materials facts, does this also have to be disclosed at the time when a buyer is going to put in the offer for a home?
What a great question. Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, so my follow-up question to that is, as a real estate agent, how would we know these answers if we have not done an inspection?
Oh, you just asked the magic question, my
Can
dear.
can you repeat the first question? I'm sorry.
She
Start from the beginning on that.
She said, what are the winning lottery numbers for the Powerball? And what is the recipe for pound cake? Those were the two questions that I heard.
Not that one.
Right when I'm wanting some sweets.
No, the first question was, when do we have to make these disclosures? When, as a real estate broker, is it the same time that the the seller's disclosure statement has to be given to the buyer? And the answer to that is yes, before the buyer makes an offer. Because the idea here is that the buyer should not make an offer without all the information. So we want to get all the information to them before they make an offer. And then Taj asked what I think is the most important follow-up question. I'm actually going to skip ahead a couple of slides here because this hits right to the heart of what Taj just asked. She said, how am I as an agent supposed to disclose this stuff if I'm not doing an inspection? And folks, from the mouths of babes right there, I don't care whether you do it yourself personally or whether you hire somebody to do it for you. But it is absolutely 100% true that you cannot put a property on the market in North Carolina and not have violated license law without having performed what on it, folks? Some type of inspection. Now, here's what you need to separate in your brain. The word inspection does not mean necessarily performed by a licensed home inspector. It could, but an inspection is any investigation of the property. Here's what our responsibility is. It's up to you to figure out how you exercise that responsibility. Our responsibility as a licensee is to look for any evidence of problems and to disclose anything we find. Now, notice, I did not say our job was to only disclose things we know. What are we supposed to also do?
Things we should have reasonably known.
Things we should have known, but you know, what does that mean though? I have to look. I have to check. I have to inspect.
That's a lot of responsibility.
Cannot just rely on what the seller tells me. I cannot, folks, it is not enough for a buyer who buys a house from you to walk in there and not have air conditioning on day one. Yeah, you can look at them all you want to and say, you should have had an inspection. You should check that. And you know what they're going to say? I'll see your ass in court. And they will win every single time because real estate brokers in North Carolina have an obligation to find the flaws with the property. We're not supposed to just disclose them. We're supposed to look for them first. Folks, when I'm doing a listing presentation, yeah, I'm looking at the things I'm going to talk about that are positive about the property. Guess what else I'm looking at?
Everything that's wrong?
Everything that's wrong. Because I'm going to be held responsible for disclosing everything that's wrong with that property. And I can be sued for failing to disclose those things that are wrong. And I can be disciplined by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission for failing to disclose those things that are wrong. And so this is what this slide gets to and sort of what the answer to Taj's question is in a really long way. Look for the red flags. Look for the warning signs of things. So give me examples of things that you can think of, like where you don't have to be. I'm not saying you got to be a structural engineer, an HVAC technician, a general contractor. We're not holding you to that kind of a standard. But give me examples of things that you might notice when you're there meeting with the seller, talking about putting the property on the market, that you would know is something that should be disclosed to a buyer as a potential issue. Whether you know whether you know the issues there or not, you know there's a sign of an issue. What's one? Kayla said leaks.
Watermark.
Mold.
Watermarks?
Watermarks on the ceiling.
So watermarks.
The floor being soft.
Yeah, watermarks on the ceiling, mold somewhere.
Burn sloping.
Cracks.
Yep.
Water in the crawl space.
Running water in the
crawl
sink.
space. I heard somebody.
The temperature.
Oh, there you go. What if you go in there? I mean, it's like 173 degrees today, right?
Mm-hmm.
What if you go show a property and it's 90 degrees in there? What if you're doing a listing presentation and you've been 3 times and it's hot in there every single time? Is that a reasonable sign that there's an issue potentially with the HVAC system?
Yeah.
Only if they're
Yeah.
not
Flag
like
out.
90 or over.
So when
Right.
when you see those potential issues, they must be disclosed. And this is where I think people get hung up on it. Because here's what people love to say. I'm not an HVAC technician. I don't know if it's broke. Last I checked, you don't have to be an HVAC technician to know your ass is hot.
Right.
Also the date on the HVAC.
That is
And what-
literally the standard you're going to be held to by the North Carolina Real Estate Commission. If somebody buys that house and the HVAC doesn't work, nobody's going to look at you and go, well, you should have known the compressor was bad, or you should have known the condenser was rusted out. They're going to look at you and ask one simple question. Was it
You're not
hot
hot?
in there?
Travis, would it be
And if it
smart?
was hot in there when you were in the property and you didn't say anything to the buyer, they're going to hold you responsible.
Yeah.
So
Travis.
basically, as a listing agent, we're just looking at potential might be something wrong with it, whereas the buyer needs to actually go into details within that grace period to find out exactly what's going on, if there are any minor or major details.
So everything about what you just said, Amy, was perfect except grace period, because I don't know what grace period you're talking about. But what you said was absolutely perfect, which is our job is to look for signs of problems and make sure we point out, hey, there's a sign that something might be wrong here, so that the buyer can decide for themselves, do they want to investigate further? Here's the thing. I don't need to tell the buyer that the condenser is blown out on the air conditioner, because I have no idea that the condenser is blown out on the air conditioner. All I know is it's hot. It's not cooling adequately because it's hot in the house. So people say to me, well, what material fact is there? It's hot. That's the material fact.
Something could be wrong.
There could be a problem, because what we want to do is put the ball in the buyer's court so that they can decide, is it worthwhile to them to further evaluate this before they make a what?
Offer.
Offer to purchase the thing. Does that make sense, everybody?
And let's be really clear, we are not there to diagnose a problem. We are there to look for abnormalities. And, you know, I think people get really overwhelmed worrying about, like, what should I be looking for, you know, type deal. If there's something that would throw you off, if you were buying that house, that's something you need to just kind of let the buyer know about.
William has asked a great question, which is a great teachable moment question. Because William has asked a great question, albeit at an inappropriate time without realizing it. And I'm not picking on you, William, when I say that, because it's really easy for this to happen when we start talking about material facts. But I love that you did it because it's a teachable moment. Here's what William's question was. If I'm working with a buyer, should I always make sure there's an inspection, whether they pay for it or I pay for it? Well, here's the thing. You didn't tell me the most important thing about that question, which is, are you working for that buyer or simply working with that buyer? Because that's going to change the answer.
Yes.
Because I should never give any buyer that I don't represent advice. I should never tell any buyer they should have an inspection unless that buyer is my client. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
But that has nothing to do with disclosing material facts to that buyer. Would I tell any buyer, whether I represented them or not, it's hot in here? What do y'all think?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. And that's the difference between a material fact. Material facts have nothing to do with who we work for, with who we represent, because we owe material facts equally to everybody.
So just to kind of go a little further on that idea, if you're telling a potential buyer that you don't represent, that it's hot in there, you've given them honesty and fairness.
So
So
here we go. I'm going to show you two scenarios, same situation, two scenarios, two different answers for how you do it. Okay.
Okay.
You are the listing agent. You have been hired by the seller. You represent the seller. You have noticed it is hot in the house. Everybody following me so far?
yes, I represent the seller.
You represent the seller. Buyer comes to an open house. They indicate they might want to make an offer. What do you say to them before they make an offer?
Here's a form
It's
you can
hot
fill
in
that
here.
offer out on. It's also really hot in here, just to let you
It's
know.
hot in here. You should be aware that it's hot in here in case you want to look into that. And I'm done. Do I owe them advice that they should investigate further, or they should have an HVAC person do that, or whatever?
If this is
No.
concerning
They're
to
not
you, I
required.
just wanted to let you know this.
And why
That's
do
it.
I not advise them to have that checked out?
Because they're not
Because
your
they
client.
They're not
Hire
our
you.
client. We don't
They're
represent
not my
them.
client. They're not my client, so I owe them just the fact, right?
Yep.
It's hot. That's all I owe them. Same house. Here's different
more, no
scenario though. I'm taking a buyer through the house, and this buyer is my client. I was hired by this buyer. I notice it's hot in the house. Do I also say to my buyer client, it's hot in here? Do I say that?
Yes, yes.
Yes, because I owe them material facts as well. Is everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
But I'm not done.
Right.
Since they're my client, I say, if I was you, I would have either a full home inspection or an HVAC inspector come in here. Something is going on with this HVAC system, and we really need to get that diagnosed, because that could cost you thousands of dollars after closing. All of that falls under the category of advice.
Advice.
We give advice to who?
Your client.
Client.
I
Client.
can already feel the question boiling in someone. Who pays for that inspection?
Well,
The client.
that's a good question.
That's part of
Buyer.
it, dude.
The client would if you're representing the buyer.
Yeah, the buyer
It
would.
depends.
It depends.
I
That's
love
exactly
it.
right. Here's the thing. It depends on what the purpose of the inspection is. And here's what I mean by that. If you're the listing agent, would you be inspecting the property for an entirely different reason than a buyer who's inspecting the property? What do y'all think?
Yes.
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 Yes. As a listing agent, why would I be inspecting the property? And when I say inspecting, either inspecting it myself or paying someone to inspect it. It doesn't matter which one you choose. That's your choice. But when I'm inspecting as the listing agent, what am I looking for that I'm obligated to disclose? The only reason I'm bothering to inspect it at all is so I can disclose what?
Material facts.
True facts.
Material facts, right? So if I am inspecting it simply for material facts, do I want any more detail about what might be wrong, what the speculation is, how much more we should evaluate this? Or do I just want like a bullet point list of like, here's a potential problem, here's a potential problem, here's a potential problem? Which one do I want?
problems.
Potentials, yeah.
I want potential problems. If it's an inspection for a buyer who's purchasing a home and they're my client, do I want a vastly more detailed inspection report for that buyer?
Yes,
Yes.
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 You own loyalty to the buyer.
Because I'm representing their best interest. Now, who pays for it? I think that largely depends on who benefits from it the most. Who benefits the most from inspecting the property prior to listing it? Is
Buyer.
it the seller, the buyer, the buyer's agent, or the listing agent? Think about who
listing
is
agent.
obligated.
The seller and the listing agent benefit the most if you do it before, because then you get to know
And of those, narrow it down to one.
the seller.
The listing.
The listing
The
agent.
listing agent.
Because the seller technically is not under any obligation to do it, but the listing agent is. It's the listing agent, folks, who has to find these things and disclose them. So who's going to pay for that inspection? Probably the listing agent. That
Right,
doesn't
and
mean it has to be that way.
I like the way you do it too, Travis, because I never thought about it till, I started seeing how you list your houses. It's on the broker to discover these material facts. So if we hire somebody who is a professional at discovering them, it's that money than just have the burden of maybe missing one that could have been reasonably known.
So here's what I always ask people that newly get into the business. They're like, do I have to pay an inspector to come to my listing? I'm like, no, you don't. Did you bring your coveralls with you? Do you have your knee pads? Are you going down in the crawl space? Because what's the answer usually to that question?
No.
Absolutely
That's
not.
my answer.
So if you're not going down there as a listing agent, folks, the only other option I've ever found that works is paying somebody to do it for you. Because option C, where you just don't do it, that's not possible.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I would prefer to pay any way you can deductible the money from end of the year.
That's it. That's exactly right. And that's what I choose to do too. I choose to do that. I pay an inspector because to me, that, as Seth said, that's just a great liability release for me, because I'm paying somebody who is literally licensed by the state to find problems. Think of it this way. If a buyer 10 years down the road came back and said, you never told me about this, and my defense was, Your Honor, I paid a licensed professional to go through the property, and I provided the buyer with a copy of that report, no cost to them. Do you think a judge is going to hold me responsible for something that buyer didn't know? Or are they going to say, look, the agent did everything they could?
Well, and then you got to have them sign it to show that they received it.
Yes, right. Just, so verify that they've got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now,
let me ask
or
you,
even just get it in an email, send it over an email. Okay. Sorry.
would a property manager do the same thing to get material facts for a house?
these are all in sales. These are all in
Oh,
sales.
just sales. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Material facts do not apply to rentals in the same manner they do for sales.
Okay.
Yep. Good question. Now, I will tell you this. The other tendency, now that we've talked about how tough it is to discover all the material facts that we need to disclose, don't go too far with it. You have to be really careful on the test not to take it too far. It is not reasonable to say that a real estate agent can be held responsible for all material facts, because the truth is that there will always be some things which simply cannot be known. They cannot be found. They are hidden. So if you see words like hidden on the test, we're not responsible for that. If it's hidden, that means there is no sign that there's a problem. Does that make sense for everybody? So, yes. I mean, I'll give you an example. Let's say there's an electrical short in a ceiling fan, but the ceiling fan works when you turn it on. There's no smoke, there's no sparking, there's no odd operation. But a week after the house closes, the ceiling fan catches on fire and burns the house down. Well, clearly there was a material fact there all along. But is it a material fact that the real estate agent is likely to be held responsible for if there was no outward sign of that problem? What do y'all think?
No.
So on the test, don't say that we're responsible for disclosing all material facts. What we are responsible for is disclosing all of the ones that we do know about and any other ones that there were signs of that we reasonably could have known about based on the situation. So as an example, there was a disciplinary case not long ago over at the Real Estate Commission. A buyer filed a complaint with the Real Estate Commission that said they had gone under contract, and they found out after they were under contract that the house needed $35,000 worth of foundation work because of water infiltration issues. And the listing agent at the hearing with the real estate commissioners said, well, I'm not a structural engineer. How could you expect me to know that it needs $30,000 worth of work? And the buyer immediately just blurted out, I don't expect you to be a structural engineer. I expected you to tell me that there was 3 feet of water standing underneath the house.
It don't take much to open that crawl space and look.
And so that's what I mean, folks. If that had been some sort of a hidden issue, agent probably never would have been questioned about it. But because it was so glaringly obvious that they either just didn't even, they most likely didn't bother to look, that they are held responsible. So if it's something that there is an obvious sign of, we're likely to be held responsible for it. If it's something that there's not an obvious sign of, we're not likely to be held responsible for it. So clearly there's some gray area there, but I will tell you on the test, they're not going to give you gray area. It's going to be very clear. If they use words like hidden, another word they'll use sometimes is latent, a latent defect. Latent means hidden. Okay. And I've got that on the next slide here for you. I love my picture of my little shark here, by the way. That's a latent shark fin right there. But a latent defect is one that is hidden from plain sight. And we are generally not held responsible for those because it's just not reasonable for us to find everything that's wrong with a property. We're only going to be held responsible for the things that have some sort of an obvious sign about them. Okay.
Let's say we're looking at a house and the garage is a mess and there's a bunch of stuff piled up against the wall. Okay.
Yep.
And I can't see it with my naked eye and I'm not suspicious of anything there.
Yep.
Is it my responsibility then to move the boxes and make sure there's no, okay.
No, the real estate commission would say, unless you had some inkling that there might be a problem there, then there'd be no reason for you to do that. You know, but now if there was some sign that there was some problem behind, that they were intentionally hiding something, then yeah, you'd have an obligation to look. But unless there was, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So let's talk about what the real estate commission would say are material defects in the property in North Carolina. The first category of them is the most obvious things. Stuff's broken. You know, the HVAC system's not functioning, the roof is leaking, there's a foundation problem, there are tanks buried underground, there's plumbing issues, there's all those kinds of things. Tyler asked, if you hire an inspector, you avoid all this. Well, no, you don't avoid the necessity to disclose, Tyler. What you do, though, is you place the responsibility for the information that's being disclosed on another professional's shoulders. Because what you're going to do is take the information from the inspector and then use it to disclose these material facts to everybody involved in the transaction. So when I list a property, as an example, and Seth helped me list one recently up in Rougemont. The house was built in, what was it, 87, 88, something like that, Seth?
It was cute.
And
but yeah, it was around that time.
The house was cute, but clearly they had not done much in the way of maintenance on the outside of it. I mean, there were obvious issues with
It was
the house.
okay, but
It wasn't in horrible shape, but there were obvious issues. I mean, the garage door was like this far off the ground when you walked up to the side of the house, and it's unplugged from the ceiling.
Garage door didn't work.
Right.
Because it was
So there's little things like that. Well, before we put it on the market, we have a home inspector go over there. He gives us a 30-page inspection report. Guess what we gave to every buyer who made an offer on that property before they made their offer?
Home inspection report.
The inspection report.
It wasn't bad.
What that does is it takes some of the liability off of us for people saying, you didn't tell us this. Because clearly
I beg to differ.
We've made every effort to tell you everything we could have reasonably known about the property. Does that help why you would do that as a potential way of handling it?
Yeah.
You do that before you get a listing?
Before you get a listing, you get that done?
Before we do the listing? We do it not before we get the listing, because I would never commit to spending money on somebody's property before I have the listing signed. But before we put it on the market, yes, getting the listing and putting it on the market are two different things. You get the listing before you put it on the market, because once you get the listing, you still have to get it ready for the market, take pictures, put together your marketing stuff, all those kinds of things. But I generally inspect them as soon as we take the listing, but before we put it on the market.
Travis,
money.
Wouldn't it behoove us as realtors, when we get this inspection report, we go over it with our clients and say, if you can kind of correct these things prior to putting it on the property, prior to putting it on the market, that you would possibly get more money and we wouldn't have these negative
It's
material
almost
effects.
like you're thinking like a salesperson now. Is there
Right.
an alternative, folks, to disclosing a problem?
Mm-hmm.
What
It-
is that alternative?
Fix it.
Fix it.
Fix it.
Fixing it,
And
yeah.
so that's another reason I like to
Spray
have the
paint it.
inspections done before we put the property on the market, because I can take the inspection to the seller and I can say, okay, this is going to go to every single buyer who's interested in making an offer. Would it be in our best interest to go ahead and correct some of these things so that we can eliminate them from the list? Because once we fixed it, guess what we don't have to do with it?
Disclose it.
Disclose it.
There's
don't have
nothing to disclose.
There's nothing to disclose. We don't have to disclose that electrical issue if we've corrected it. We can take that right off the list of disclosure.
And yes, not even that there was one present before. If it's fixed, it's fixed.
Fixed is fixed. Fixed is fixed.
So you paid that home inspector to inspect that house that you were just talking about, that you were going to list out of your pocket, right?
Well, I paid, the business paid, the firm
Right,
paid.
okay, the firm.
Because the firm is charging it's no different. Let me ask you this question. Let me ask it this way, Howard, because I think it'll help you turn it around in your head. Would you ask somebody who owns a shoe store, so let me get this straight. You paid for these shoes out of your pocket, these shoes that you're selling to me right now, you paid for these out of your pocket. Would you ask the shoe store owner that, or is that pretty self-obvious?
I guess it's self-obvious.
So
I guess-
if I'm offering a professional service to someone and charging a big fee for that professional service, aren't there going to be things included in that professional service?
Okay, I get it. Okay.
It's no different than photography and videography, and it is simply part of the process.
Okay.
And so I factored all of those costs into what I'm ultimately charged. I mean, we charge those folks a 6% commission to sell a house. So I mean, ultimately they're paying $15,000 in commissions to us. Okay, so I spent $400 on photography and another $500 on an inspection. We spent $900. We made $15,000. That's a pretty good trade-off.
What if, rare occasion, what if that house doesn't sell? Did you lose your money?
I do. And that's just like what if I own a shoe store and I buy 100 pairs of shoes that nobody buys from me? I lose my money on them, right? And so don't invest in things that you don't think have I would not, if I had a property that I did not think was going to sell, I would probably have a conversation with the seller about maybe paying for that inspection, because I'd be more concerned that was going to happen. But those are all business decisions, not what the real estate commission simply doesn't care how you get this done. They just care the buyer needs to be informed of these material facts. And however we make that happen, that's the magic of what we do. Yeah. Okay. The other categories of material facts. Elizabeth said she spent $40,000 in commissions. You still had to pay for the inspection. Well, let me introduce you to a good listing agent sometime.
Thank you very much. But yeah, and the property sold in 3 days, so there was not a lot of work to be done.
There you go.
Oh my goodness.
There are other categories of material facts other than just problems with the property, things that would impact the value of the property. So let me ask you a question. Do you think covenants should be important to a buyer to know before they make an offer on the property?
Yes.
Very
Yes.
important.
And guess what the real estate commission says covenants are? A what?
Material fact.
Material fact.
And a
facts.
pertinent.
So that means that they need to be disclosed to a buyer in writing before the buyer makes what?
An offer.
An offer to purchase the property. Any knowledge that we have or should have had about zoning changes, any knowledge that we have or should have had about roads being constructed in the area. So as an example, if you're selling property in Johnston County near where 540 is going to come through finally in another 100 years or so, whenever they finish 540 down there in Johnston County, they've been building it for the last 30 years. Whenever they finish it down there, if you're selling property in that area, do you think it's an important material fact to disclose to potential buyers in that area that, number one, an 8-lane highway is coming through here, and number two, that could result in your property being impacted by this highway? What do y'all think?
Yes.
For
It
sure.
could negatively impact the value.
It could negatively impact the value. It could positively impact the value. I mean, what if your property happens to be right there where the exit's going to be, where they want to put the sheets? Then all of a sudden it positively impacts the value. But because it could impact it at all makes it a material fact.
Right. What if they bought the house and then later on it gets taken up by eminent domain? Like,
That's it. So, I mean, things like the airport is nearby, train tracks.
ugly townhomes are coming down the road.
They're developing townhouses back here. People want to know that because they, well, I have trees now. Well, you're not going to have them for long because they're building townhouses back there. Those are the kinds of things that are also material facts, if we know about them or we reasonably could have known about them. And then the last one, and this one is the toughest on a test, I think, for you to identify. If it affects whether or not somebody can close, it's a material fact. I'm going to say that again. If it affects whether or not somebody can close, it's a material fact. Buyer can't get a loan. Does that affect their ability to close?
Yeah. Yes.
Then it's a material fact. And if it's a material fact, who do we disclose it to?
Everybody.
Everybody. Let me throw that out there for you. Let me put it in real world terms, folks. If you're a buyer's agent and your buyer client who you owe loyalty and obedience to has their loan fall apart, do you have to spill the tea on your own client and tell everybody associated with that transaction, my client has lost the ability to close this transaction? Yes.
Well, after you've tried everything else, right?
Right. You're going to scramble like crazy to try to make it happen and try to keep it from impacting their ability to close. And you're not going to say, oh, because they lost their job or because they, didn't pay for the furniture they bought at Rooms to Go and it ruined their credit. That's their personal business, right? That's none of anybody else's business. But the fact that they can't close is a material fact. So as an example, perfect example, I had a listing one time years ago. Husband and wife listed their house with me. We put it on the market. A week later, the wife calls me in tears, sobbing. She had just caught the husband with somebody else in the house. And she was immediately moving out and filing for divorce. Folks, does that impact their ability to potentially close and sell that transaction now that they're going to be involved in a legal proceeding?
Yes.
Sure.
That sucks.
And so do I have to disclose to everybody involved who might be making them an offer?
Unfortunately, yes.
They're going through a divorce. Do I have to do that?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes.
But that's all.
And now I don't tell them why they're going through a divorce, that he's, in the bed with the neighbor and all that. That's somebody's personal business. But the fact that they're going through a divorce because it could impact their ability to close the transaction becomes a material fact to everybody. Does that make sense? Is that following?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So if it could impact their ability to close, it becomes a material fact as well. Now, we don't always get it right. As a matter of fact, this is probably the single area where agents make the most mistakes. I think of everything that happens in our business that we, where we see agents making mistakes, material fact disclosure is probably one of the most common areas where we see those, those things happen. So what do we call it? What are the labels? You're going to be tested on these. What do we call it when a mistake is made regarding these disclosures? And by a mistake, what we mean is they either are not disclosed or they're disclosed incorrectly. There's a label for these things, and you're going to be tested on the label. And those two labels are these words right here. We're looking at these words: a misrepresentation or an omission. A misrepresentation is wrong information. Now, remember, we're not talking about a seller misrepresenting here. We're not talking about a buyer misrepresenting here. We're talking about somebody with a real estate license. So what does it mean when somebody with a real estate license misrepresents a material fact? It simply means they've given wrong information. It doesn't matter why the information is wrong. It doesn't matter if it's their fault that it's wrong. It just matters that the information is wrong. So let's say that I'm holding an open house at one of my listings and it's busy. I mean, there's 50 people in here all over the place looking at the property, people asking me questions left, right, and center. And a buyer runs up to me and goes, "How many square feet is this thing?" And I tell them it's 2840 when it's really 2480. And I just inverted the numbers in my head. Have I misrepresented?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. It doesn't matter that I did it innocently. It doesn't matter that it was an obvious, clear sort of oopsie mistake. I gave incorrect information. Does that make sense for everybody?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And anytime incorrect information is given, that is called a misrepresentation. Are we all good on that?
Yeah.
Yes.
An omission is leaving out information that should have been given. If the roof leaks, should that information be given to a buyer?
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And if it's not, it was omitted. It doesn't matter why it wasn't given. If we forgot to give it, that's still an omission. If we intentionally didn't give it, that's still a what?
Omission.
An omission. So
Adding information, right?
anytime information that should have been given is left out of the conversation, we have omitted. Anytime information was given incorrectly, we have what?
Misrepresentation.
We have misrepresentation.
Representation.
How are we all feeling on those terms right now?
Yep.
Pretty good on that?
Got it.
So an example of a misrepresentation. Tommy is a listing broker and he states to a potential buyer that one of his listings has no problems with the roofing. Later, the buyer finds out the roof is actually leaking. So here's the question. Did Tommy give information?
No.
No.
Oh, he didn't give information?
Yes.
Yes. He said there were no problems.
He said there were
He
no
gave the wrong
problems.
information.
It says in the states.
Did he give any information at all?
Yes,
He
he
did.
did the
Yes.
wrong.
Yes. Was the information incorrect?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. That is a what?
Misrepresentation.
That is a misrepresentation. That is a he gave information. The information was wrong. That is a misrepresentation. Look at this one. Samara is a provisional broker who takes her first ever listing. She tours the property with the seller, but is a bit too nervous to ask the seller about the obvious cracks in the foundation wall. A buyer who did not have a home inspection purchases the property and later finds foundation settlement issues. Now, let me point something out to you. It doesn't matter here whether the buyer had an inspection or not. That has nothing to do with disclosing material facts, because that's what the buyer does. Material facts is about what we do. It also really doesn't matter here why Samara doesn't mention the cracks in the foundation wall. It doesn't matter that she's nervous. It doesn't matter that she noticed them. That doesn't matter that she didn't notice them. It matters that they were there, and therefore they should have been what?
Disclosed.
Disclosed. So her failure to disclose something that should have been disclosed is called a what?
An omission.
An omission. That is an omission of material fact. Okay. Now, they will on the test throw additional words in there called willful or negligent. This just refers to intent. If somebody did it on purpose, it's willful. If somebody did it without intending to, it's what?
Negligent.
It's negligent. So when you back up over here to Samara, it says she tours the property with the seller, but is a bit too nervous to ask the seller about the obvious cracks in the foundation wall. A buyer who did not have a home inspection purchased the property and later finds the settlement issues. So do you think Samara willfully omitted here, or do you think she negligently omitted? What do y'all think?
Willfully.
Willfully, because she saw the cracks, right? Does that make sense for everybody? She saw the cracks. It says she was too nervous to ask. Well, that's willful. She has some knowledge of the problem. Negligent would have been if she was so nervous that she never even what?
Saw it.
She never saw it. She never noticed them. She missed them. That's negligence. Willful is when you do notice it and you make a choice not to do something. Okay. So how do you put it all together? If we make an incorrect statement and we know the statement's wrong, what is that?
Willful.
Willful.
Willful what though?
Willful misrepresentation.
Willful misrepresentation. There's two pieces to it, right? You make an incorrect statement. Is that willful or is that misrepresentation? Make an incorrect statement.
That's willful.
That has nothing to do with willful. Making an incorrect statement is what?
Negligent.
It's not negligent.
Misrepresentation.
It is a misrepresentation. This part right here, we know the statement is wrong. That is what?
Omission.
We know the statement is wrong.
Negligent.
We know
Willful.
wrong.
Willful.
You all run in 86,000 ridiculous directions with this, folks. If I know what I'm doing is wrong, am I doing it willfully or am I doing? If you say to a child, you knew better than to do that, is the child negligent or are they willful? Willful. That's willful. So we said something wrong. Misrepresentation. We knew that it was wrong. Willful. That is a willful misrepresentation. Look at this one. Broker makes an incorrect statement. Talk to me just about that part. What is that? Make the incorrect
Misrepresentation.
That's a misrepresentation. The broker has no knowledge. Talk to me about that.
Neglect.
That's negligent. Put them together. That is a negligent misrepresentation. Does everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very easy to determine if it's willful or negligent. Don't make it.
Wait.
The broker makes no disclosure at all. They didn't say anything.
Omission.
That's an omission. And the broker knows that they should have disclosed.
Willfulness.
That's willful, so that when you put them together, that's the willful, the dreaded willful omission, right? Look at this one. Broker does not make a disclosure. That's an omission. Okay. And then the broker is unaware that they made a mistake at all. They have no
Negligent.
That's negligent. So put them together, that is the negligent omission. So that's the way you break those apart if you ever see them on a test, right? Saying something wrong, misrepresentation. So, all right, let me give you one. See what you got right here. Well, actually, we got a couple. Josie is a licensed salesperson who is taking a listing and walks through the property making note of all issues for disclosure purposes. Josie does not notice any sign of electrical issues, even though there are some spots of melted plastic on receptacle covers. Months later, after a buyer closes on the property, the buyer discovers that the electrical wiring of several circuits is overloaded. What would be the best way to describe this issue from Josie's perspective?
Number 4.
Negligent omission.
Number 3, negligent omission.
Negligent omission.
Negligent omission.
Negligent omission.
If she saw that there was
I'm going with number
melting
4.
covers,
Exactly, number 4. For negligent
And a willful
misrepresentation.
omission is what I'm saying.
I think it's willful omission. What is it, Travis?
Negligent misrepresentation.
But it says doesn't notice any sign.
Negligent omission.
Okay.
Yes.
Those of
Yeah,
you,
because she did not notice.
stop
I'm
right
having an
there.
anxiety attack.
Hold on.
You don't have me
It tells
rereading.
you.
Stop right there. Those of you, you're focusing too much on the wrong piece first. Stop trying to figure out the willful or negligent part, even though that's the first word first. What part do you have to figure out first? Is it a what?
Second word.
What's your
Misrepresentation
Is
or
it
omission.
an omission or is it a misrepresentation? Folks, did Josie tell the buyer anything about an
No.
electrical issue?
No.
No.
No. So what answers can we eliminate as possibilities?
Anything with
1 and 2.
Representation.
Anything with the word misrepresentation in there.
Anything associated with she gave information because she did not give
He
any.
never gave any information. We know this is an omission. Does everybody see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Now we need to ask ourselves, did she know she was making a mistake, or was it a mistake of ignorance? Is it a mistake of
know.
knowledge or a mistake of ignorance? Which one is it?
Knowledge.
Ignorance.
Ignorant.
Knowledge.
Say ignorance. What knowledge? What knowledge does she have?
Well, I guess, yeah.
He didn't know.
She didn't know. And if she didn't know, that is what?
Ignorance.
Negligent.
That is negligent. She didn't know she was messing up. It doesn't make it any less of a screw up. It's just a different type of a screw up. It's an omission and it's a negligent one. What would make this a willful omission?
If she noticed the melted
If
plastic.
she
Yeah.
knew.
I did the same thing.
She
Because it had
knows,
a-
she knew, she wrote down in her notes, there's an electrical problem here, and she still chose not to disclose it. That would be a willful omission. That's not what
Even
happened.
if she saw the melted spots.
If she saw, if it made a point of saying she noticed the melted spots and didn't say anything about them.
Okay, so just saying, even though there are some of melted plastic on receptacle covers.
Well, right.
That was the tricky part.
No, it's not tricky. If
No?
there was no melted plastic, there wouldn't be a material fact at all. Because if there was no melted plastic, there'd be no sign of anything that needed to be disclosed,
Right.
right?
Yep.
The only reason this is an omission at all is that there is a sign of a problem, and that is not being what?
Disclosed. So she
Disclosed.
did not see the melted plastic.
Right. Another way of thinking of negligent is she missed the signs.
Okay.
If you ignore the signs, it's willful. If you miss them, it's what?
Negligent.
It's negligent. If there are no signs there, there's nothing to disclose,
There's nothing.
right? Look at the next one. William just purchased a home in Raleigh that was listed by Zach of Capital Properties LLC. Zach's MLS listing mentions that the property is serviced by city water and sewer, even though Zach has discussed with the seller that there's a well on the property which provides drinking water. This is an example of what? Take your time, read it, decide first, is it a misrepresentation or an omission? And then decide, is it willful or negligent?
Willful misrepresentation?
Yeah,
Yep.
that's what I say.
Yeah.
Willful.
Information.
It's not a omission because it was said.
This is a willful
Willful
misrepresentation.
misrepresentation.
So let's first identify the misrepresentation. Let's identify the misrepresentation. The MLS listing mentions it serves by city water. That's incorrect information, correct?
Wrong information, yes.
And because we have given incorrect information, that makes it a misrepresentation, which means it could either be one or two. It cannot be three or four. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So now let's find the other piece. The other piece
He
says
knows.
Zach has discussed with the seller, there's a well on the property. Well, if he's discussed it, he knows. That
He
makes
knew
it
it, yeah.
what?
Willful.
That makes it willful, and when you put them together, that's a willful misrepresentation.
Oh my goodness.
Okay, it's a two-part thing, but you're not looking for the willful or negligent part first. You're looking at the misrepresentation or omission part first, and then you're backtracking and saying, okay, now that I know what they did they do it on purpose or not? Everybody okay with that?
Yep.
Okay, good. Good. This is a vocabulary word you might see on a test that you need to be aware of. That's not a violation. I think people see it and think it's a violation. Well, depending on the type of puffing you're talking about, it might be a violation of some laws, but it's not a violation of real estate laws to puff. Okay. Puffing is a terminology that's used in real estate for basically hyping things up, exaggerating things, but things that can't be proven wrong or right. Let me give you an example of a misrepresentation. The house is 2,500 square feet, but it's actually 2,200 square feet. That is misrepresentation. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yep.
Yes.
The most fantastic view in Downing Creek, that is puffing. Because that cannot be verified one way or the other. Because the most fantastic view, isn't that going to be a matter of whoever's opinion you're asking?
Mm-hmm.
Because for some people, the most fantastic view in Downing Creek could be a brick wall. For some people, it could be the garbage cans next door. For some people, it could be the woods. There's no, so puffing. So, gorgeous landscaped lot. Puffing or misrepresentation?
Puffing.
Puffing.
Puffing. Home located on waterfront property when it proves not to be waterfront.
Misrepresentation.
Does everybody see the difference?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Telling big fat old lies.
Yes, lies are misrepresentations, but puffing is, it's that
opinion.
It's opinion based, right? Oh, this is the most beautiful house in Cary. Well, is it? I don't know. According to who? That's
You're just
puffing.
hyping it up.
Right, that's hype. And hype is not illegal, right?
Was it the word most that made that bad?
What was that?
Was it the word most that made that bad on the bottom of it? If he just said it's a beautiful lot in Emerald Isle.
It's not bad at all. I'm not saying that puffing's bad. Puffing is not bad. Puffing is not a violation. Puffing is just, you have to be careful not to cross the line from puffing into misrepresentation. So puffing, there's nothing wrong with puffing. As a matter of fact, is puffing sort of a necessary part of our job sometimes?
Yes.
Yeah, it's what they put in the written part of the listing.
That's right.
Right,
That's what we put.
embellishment.
Imagine your life in the most gorgeous light in Cary. That's puffing. And it's exactly what we do. Hype it up, baby. But don't let puffing turn into misrepresentation. Everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. Tyler, your answer in your head is right. Of course, a provisional broker cannot list a property on their own, because provisional brokers can't do anything on their own. Provisional brokers only work under the supervision and watchful eye of their broker in charge. And so the listing is going to belong to the firm, to the office. And then the provisional broker, like any other broker, works for the office. Okay. The only difference between a provisional broker in that regard and a non-provisional broker is that the non-provisional broker does have an option of choosing not to work for an office and working unsupervised. And so they might be able to represent client unsupervised, but a provisional broker can never represent a client unsupervised.
Can I just ask you a question? In his example that he gave, he said, can I work for, if he works for the BIC, right? But he goes out and he gets the listing, right? And the BIC is monitoring to make sure he's done all the paperwork right, he's done all the disclosures right, but the listing still can go in his name, right?
Well, yeah, as far as on the sign, yes,
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, we can put this, but the sign is also going to identify the firm, because ultimately it's the firm that's been hired by the client. And it's not a stupid question. You got to get that stuff solidified in your brain. You got to get it on lockdown that it's not us as individuals that are being hired by these people. It's our office, and it all flows through the office.
Right, but it doesn't mean that we don't get credit or we don't get to start to build our reputation.
Sure,
right.
Absolutely. Because the real estate commission doesn't say the broker can't put their name on the sign. The real estate commission says the firm has to put their name on the sign. Anything extra is just that, extra. And, so obviously the broker is going to want to put their name up there and prominently feature their name, because they're going to want to start to build that reputation for themselves. Okay. There are some things, and these will show up on a test, that are considered to be what we call stigmatized properties, which are not material facts in North Carolina. Someone believes the property is haunted. That is not a material fact in North Carolina. Somebody died in the property. That is not a material fact in North Carolina. So let me be clear about that. Are we under any obligation to disclose to customers that someone died in the property?
No.
No.
No. Are we under any obligation to disclose to customers that someone committed suicide in the property?
No.
No.
No, that is not a material fact. Are we under any obligation to disclose to customers that a murder was committed in the property?
No.
No, that is not a material fact. Are we under any obligation to disclose to customers that the previous owner died of COVID on the front porch of the property?
No.
No.
No. Now listen, they test you on stuff like that, and people think it is, because here's a different question. Is that information going to be important to lots of buyers? Are there buyers who would consider that important information?
Sure.
Yes. And here's the differentiation. You have to ask yourself, are they my client or not? Because when we're talking about material facts, folks, we're only talking about what we have to disclose to customers. So if somebody were to ask me, would you tell a buyer that somebody had died in the property? My question would be, is the buyer my client? Because if the buyer is not my client, what do you think my answer is going to be?
I don't know.
No, because it's not a material fact. And the only thing I'm going to tell a buyer that's not my client are the material facts. Does that make sense for everybody?
Yes.
Would I tell my buyer client that somebody died in the property if I knew that it had happened?
Yes, because it's blind.
Yes, absolutely. Because what do we owe to clients, folks?
Loyalty.
Everything.
Everything. We owe them the disclosure of everything we know that could impact their decision making. So Peyton asked, if they ask, do we tell? Well, here's what I'll tell you about that, Peyton. Don't ever misrepresent. You can choose to answer the question if you have your client's permission, because remember, this is not your client that's asking you this question. You're being asked the question by a customer. Did somebody die in this property? First of all, since it's not a material fact, I would go get my client's permission before I answered that question, because it's really up to my client. What could your client, the seller, not want you to tell that somebody died in the property?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, for obvious reasons, right? And so if your client says don't tell, then don't tell, but don't lie. I don't know is an answer, and it better only be the answer you give if you truly what?
Don't know.
Don't know. I don't know is not an acceptable substitute for I am not telling you. There is a difference. If you know that somebody died in the property and you are asked if somebody died in the property by a customer and you do not want to disclose that information, say, I am not at liberty to disclose that information. Don't say I don't know, because that would be a misrepresentation. Okay, so just be careful not to misrepresent the situation. Okay, I'm not sure what you mean.
Telling that, you're telling that something's happened in the house, right?
What, that you're not at liberty to disclose?
Yes, that's a red flag.
Well, of
I'm
course,
gonna
but that's for them to figure out. Again, we have to operate legally within the bounds of the law. What other answer could I possibly give? If I say I don't know, I've lied, correct?
Yes. Right. Yes, I understood.
So it puts us in, if we're put on the spot with a tough question like that, we really only have two choices: either disclose the information, in which case we should get our client's permission to disclose it, or say that we're not at liberty to disclose. And of course, we know that a buyer's going to read between the lines there. And this is important to people. I mean, I showed a house one time in Chapel Hill. Kid killed his parents in the house. Not only kill them in the house, but killed them on prom night, wrapped them in the rugs, put them in the corner behind the door in the master bedroom, and then proceeded to go to the prom and have a party at the house where he invited everybody over to the house with mom and daddy propped up behind the door in the bedroom.
Oh my God.
Sure did.
Oh my God.
And I showed the house.
Oh.
Obviously, you're going to get in stuff like that in real estate. And so you got to know where the lines are. You got to know.
Did they buy it?
No, my clients did not buy it. They did not buy it. And I told them, I was like, this house is infamous. Like, this house has been on the news. This house has been, they're like making a movie about this event. This was, gosh, probably 10, 12 years ago now. But that really did happen in Chapel Hill. Yeah. Awful. Awful. So, I mean, you know, you're going to get into those things. Those are called stigmatized properties, and they are not, no, it's not still empty. It's sold, I think, 2 or 3 times since then now. One just recently sold in Durham that is very famous. The Peterson house, where she supposedly fell down the staircase like 26 times, you know, and he was put on trial for murder. You know, supposedly he was sitting out by the pool and they found blood from one, and they actually made a movie about it called The Staircase. So the house was like the central starring role in the movie. And that house just sold for almost $3 million in Durham. So yeah.
Was that her son? That was her son, right? That was on trial?
No, it was the husband.
It was her husband.
He was running for mayor of Durham at the time. Yeah, they came home from a Christmas party, and he claimed to have come back in the house and found her dead at the bottom of the stairs. It was like, the house is a really big house. It has 2 sets of stairs. This is like the servants' stairs at the back of the house, or the, you know, the service stairs. and he claimed to have found her dead at the bottom of the stairs. But it was, I mean, there was, I mean, blood everywhere. Like, I mean, I don't know how you fall down the stairs and manage to get blood 8 feet high on the wall, but that's what he claimed. And it was a big trial and went on for a long time. Yeah. And it just sold recently. So, I mean, you're going to sell properties like that. All right. And last one, which does pop up, and I think you're going to see it on the test, and I think it is surprising to a lot of people. The presence in the area of a registered sex offender is not a material fact. Is not a material fact. That does not mean it's not important to people. That does not mean if this is your client we're talking about that you're not going to help them navigate this. This means if you're talking to a customer, so we're only talking, when we're talking about material facts, I have to keep reminding you that we're only talking about things we disclose to customers. If we are talking to a customer, somebody we don't represent, we do not owe them disclosure of the information that there is a registered sex offender either living on the property or even near the property. That is not a material fact. Now, obviously, if it's your client, that is a different story, because if you're representing this buyer and you're aware that a registered sex offender lives next door, would you say that would be information you would need to disclose to your client?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Clearly to your client, because we owe our client everything that could impact their decision-making. That's not the question here, though. I'm saying I'm the listing agent. I represent the seller, and the buyer comes to look at the property. Am I required to inform that buyer that there's a registered sex offender living on the property or across the street, anything like that? No. We are not. We are not. Just be aware that the information is available. If you, the law that makes that information available is called Megan's Law. Megan's Law does not require us to disclose that there are sex offenders nearby. It just requires that information to be publicly available. So if people want to do the research themselves, that's where the sex offender registry comes from, is Megan's Law, and having it be available to the public is part of Megan's Law. Yes, it can impact the property value. Here's what I would say about it. I would not make this disclosure unless I had my client's permission, because this could very much have a negative impact on the value of your client's property, for it to be known that there was a registered sex offender living nearby. Remember, you represent the best interest of your client. Don't try to protect someone who's not your client while harming your own client. So I know that it's, we want to do the right thing by people in general, but we have to be very careful not to overstep those bounds when it comes to the client relationship. Okay. And that, folks, is the end of section 3.2. And I mean, we got plenty of time, so I feel like we should knock out another couple of sections.